more that you can lean into your own personal discomfort, say what needs to be said in a non-offensive way, the more you make the world a better place.
All right, Dr. Kasia, welcome and thank you so much. I'm getting an update right now on our production that is broadcasting live on all the platforms as well as the Zoom meeting. And I'm going to quickly toggle into the Zoom meeting and see if I can solve this technical problem. Just bear with us one moment, please.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Can everyone hear us on Zoom? Jess? Okay, great. Dr. Kasia, welcome to this live. You and I have had the opportunity to get to know one another through our mutual friend and colleague and mentor in many cases, the great Gary Nesner, founder of the FBI's Crisis Negotiation Unit and lead negotiator at Waco. And in the course of that time together, I was completely thrilled to learn about your area of expertise and focus, which really brings discipline and awareness around the negotiator or the responder's emotional state, self-awareness, and arousal. So if you would, why don't you share a little bit about your particular area of focus and expertise in this discipline of negotiation, because I think it's an underappreciated and certainly underprofessed notion when it comes to education in crisis de-escalation and negotiation. Please.
First of all, Andy, let me express my sincere gratitude and excitement to be here with you. And indeed, we share similar values and have been introduced by the wonderful Gary Nesner.
Yeah.
And it's really a pleasure to be here tonight and have so many people watching us and following on this very important topic, because very often we tend to consider negotiation and approach negotiation purely from the process side, strategic, tactical, and like you said, the psychology behind the whole process, it's what actually makes it very, very interesting. I was trained in the win-win approach, then I was trained in the FBI originated approach to difficult negotiations. And as the years went by, I felt there's a missing link, that it's great to have certain principles, and I think they're fundamental and foundational in the way that we exercise our de-escalation, engage in mediation, difficult conversations, negotiations, high stakes. But the missing link is the human element, is understanding why people behave in a particular way, and what to do in order to connect better. I think that this connection and understanding definitely is at a deficiency in our times. Otherwise, you can be trained in as many MBAs, executive courses, training sessions, and so on, and you'll find yourself walking the same path. You'll just be adding gas in the snow and digging yourself deeper into certain behavioral patterns without understanding, why am I behaving the way I am behaving? And we all carry some traumas with us. We all have our past experiences that will definitely impact the way that we interact with other people, especially in crisis situations or tough negotiations where the emotions tend to run high.
Yeah, I think the demands of our workforces are greater than ever for more meaningful education around this topic. I've been in the game since the late 90s in Paterson, New Jersey, where I started in the direct care environment of what's known as a psychosocial clubhouse model, where in the clubhouse model, which was based on the famous Fountain House facility in Manhattan, there were no staff-only areas. Everything was shared. And the only area that was off limits to people served was, the medical records room, the chart room, but just about everywhere else was shared. And all of the environment and the activities between staff and people served was oriented toward, yes. Thank you, Jess. I was asked to move the cursor off of my face because I'm sharing the screen. Thank you. I'm so appreciative of her. Um, all of this was in the service of creating relationship, but interestingly, the education to the workforce in working in that environment describes, let's say there's a review of the disorders, maybe a review of some active listening skills. There's some kind of psychomotor physical training, getting out of, wrist grabs or bite releases or hair pulls. And then someone checks a box that you've been adequately trained to
Mm-hmm.
engage in crisis de-escalation. And I have to say that from then all the way through my career in the state of Washington as the clinical training manager of the forensic system, which is the overlap of the justice system with the mental health system, the training has not changed in 25 years for large workforce. It's a review of some ideas, maybe a review of some active listening skills, and then some kind of physical training. And
Absolutely.
you would wonder why. How is it that psychiatrists, master's level psychologists, nurses, social workers, all of them are left to their own devices in developing any kind of awareness about self? So at Jumpstart, we've been acutely interested in this from the fear management and anxiety management perspective. And what you have done in the form of a practice is taken it to a whole other level. So maybe you can share a little bit more about, your vision and view of how to walk someone into the journey of
Mm-hmm.
self-exploration and analysis when it comes to certain activity like negotiation.
Certainly. Well, let me start by saying that I'm, on one level, I'm a very structured person. In my younger years, I used to be a perfectionist, and the price that I paid for that was a burnout episode.
Yeah.
And then I came to my senses a little bit. But on the other side, I'm a very intuitive person. And as I mentioned before, my journey started with the training itself. But the Jungian path of psychoanalysis was more of a spiritual, I would even call it, event when one of my friends introduced me to the Jung Institute in a very simple way. I was invited for a glass of wine in the beautiful gardens. Yes, in the beautiful gardens. Yeah. I mean, Andy, I'm in Italy now. It's 8:30 p.m. We can have a little bit of fun as well.
Oh,
So
yes, please. Yeah.
that's how it started. And in those beautiful gardens next to the Jung Institute in Zurich, Switzerland, I had the sensation, if you may, I had a calling. Something was pulling me towards. I was always interested in psychiatry and
Yes.
psychology, psychiatry. When I was doing my legal studies, I was very much into forensic law, criminal law,
Yep.
victimology. It was always fascinating to me. Somehow I never went down that path because I started as a businesswoman, as a business professional. I was always working as a manager. Then I was trained in as a negotiation expert. But that pull towards the psychiatry, psychology was still pretty much alive. And I felt it very strongly then. So I first started, I think it was a certificate in advanced studies in Jungian psychology. And I got so interested in it because I saw the many parallels. I also saw how I was brainwashed corporately into strategies, tools, and tactics.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Yes.
without understanding the fundamental principles of, how my traumas, my experiences, my complexes, my shadow, myself, my ego, how does all these Jungian concepts come together in the negotiation scene and sometimes take over? If you don't manage your demons will negotiate for you, basically.
Yeah.
So that's why I founded my executive practice. And my objective is to empower people, mostly executives, but not only. I also work with patients who have psychotic episodes, who have personality disorders. And the objective is to empower these people to get a better understanding of some of the in-depth processes that drive their behavior. And it's not about healing, because a lot of people think that psychology or psychoanalysis is about healing. Jung himself said it's not about healing, it's about balancing.
Yeah,
It's about
integration.
setting. Exactly. So you can have a balanced attitude at the negotiation table, or in your crisis situations that you described, which I have a lot of respect for your work.
I know you do, and you routinely remind me of that, and thank you. I feel very respected by you and have since the beginning. There is a value in the lived experience component of being in the direct care setting, and that's my bailiwick. I've been in front of more angry people that want to punch me in the face than I can count, and all I have are my words to try to de-escalate that, which is the entire basis of the psychiatric emergency response team concept. People who are dedicated to responding to emergency up to and including violence, with a desire to de-escalate and avoid the use of containment procedures. I have witnessed in real time the shadow of human beings, myself included, almost like a ninja, creep into the interaction and begin to engage in destructive activity. And in as much as I think there's value in, let's say, prescribing certain ideas to people to consider, the real gift I think that educators give to a workforce is a capacity and an invitation for self-exploration as a journey. In other words, it's not a one and done training. Now all of a sudden you're aware of all of your shadow material and how it participates in an event. Rather, you're invited to a lifelong adventure of understanding how I can get in my own way. And I have watched this with extraordinarily high paid clinicians speak in completely out of control ways to someone with schizoaffective disorder, who, was, let's say, satisfying a long-term criminal sentence for murder in a mental health setting, which was secure. And the doctor speaks to the patient in such a way that I know the patient is about to take this doctor's head off. And the only thing between me and the doctor, the patient and the doctor, is me and my team to stop that. And then if you have, and maybe we can talk about this, Kasia, because I think it's worth exploring. I think physicians and clinicians understandably and have to, through their education and development process, engender an extraordinary sense of responsibility in the care of another human being. Sometimes what appears to come along with that is a predisposition to feel offended if the patient disagrees with their prescription. And it's at that moment, the doorway opens to aversion between the caregiver and the person served. So now we have a doctor who is offering meaningful advice, maybe script, whatever the case might be. Now we have someone over here who is living with serious mental illness. They have some characterological difficulties and they love to fight. So now the doctor is saying it really needs to be this way, and the patient is presenting resistance. Maybe it's legitimate, maybe it's something that the physician is feeling is filtered through their vulnerabilities, and then there's conflict. Maybe you can speak a little bit to how providers can get better at that.
Definitely. Well, let me go back because I was taking some notes on the important things that you were saying before. Maybe let's go back to the concept of the shadow, which I find very, very interesting in the psyche. the gray zone, let's call it. Okay, the most important is to understand that whatever we suppress, whatever emotion, whatever fear, whatever factor or trigger that is suppressed and not expressed and not acknowledged externally, internally, goes in the shadow of the psyche. And we can suppress up to a moment, and usually the explosion will happen in the least convenient moment. It's like the gray zone in the economy. Just because drugs are illegal or forbidden, it doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means that the gray zone is getting bigger. It's the same in the psyche. So usually, a lot of the executives that I work with are top level performers, C-level, many of them, I would say
Money, yeah.
exactly, money, power, sex, and rock and roll, this type of lifestyle. I hope it's not inappropriate content.
No, with me? Are you kidding? No, you're not. You haven't even scratched.
Here.
You haven't even scratched the surface of where I can take it. So you're good.
Well, Andy, we can take that conversation in private. Anyway, now that we had our fun, so you have this image of the perfect executive or the perfect professional. 85 to 90% of them are suffering from addictions. Alcohol, drugs, prescription drugs,
Nobody wants to talk about that, Kasia.
No one wants to talk about it, and they have a whole shadow, or some of them have a split. I'm not talking here about serious schizophrenic disorders and personality disorders, but a lot of them have a split, and a lot of them have a huge shadow, sometimes two different lives, that even the family members are not fully aware of until the moment that an escalation, a crisis happens, an episode, psychotic episode, and so on. And, we're not helping people by prescribing, by offering solutions, by offering tactics, strategies, tools, and that's not going to solve the problem. As you mentioned, this disconnect between the patient and the doctor happens because of coping mechanisms. We all have different coping mechanisms, and not having enough assistance in understanding, first of all, how can I carry this person through my own personality, through my own fears, and so on. I really like the concept. When I started studying at the Jung Institute, I was overwhelmed by the amount of work that they made us do. The bare minimum are 300 hours of self-analysis. Now, before I started Jungian psychology, I never believed in this. I always thought I'm a very hands-on person. I can manage. I'm very intellectual. I'm going to reason my way out of my own emotions. That's what I believe. And I thought, now looking back, good luck. Good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Good luck with that. But anyway, we all have our delusions in life. That was mine. And I never believed, that talking, self-analysis, and so on. And I experienced how difficult the process is of self-exploration that you mentioned before, the capacity, the maturity as well, on the emotional and intellectual level combined, of self-exploration. And I believe we don't give people enough of that, enough of that empowerment. And the reaction very often will be frustration, anger, violence, escalation, because of this disconnect. So
I couldn't agree more. And I would say that one of the areas of interest I have is to how to make that journey exciting. How do you pitch it to people? I'm not asking you that in a direct sense, rather rhetorically. I think there's a opportunity for people like us to share with others based on our own experience of, let's say, distance traveled. This was not all bad, like after the initial discomfort, it kind of becomes fascinating
yes,
to and empowering to learn that I have some control over my impulses in the same way Viktor Frankl talked about it in his work.
you read my mind. You read my mind, because when I exactly wanted to talk about Viktor Frankl, because you said make it exciting. And I thought about his book, Man's Search for Meaning. And what he says, that if man can find purpose and meaning, he can withstand any adversary life event if there is purpose and there is meaning, you know.
Yeah. What's the motivation to and that's different for each person. In other words, there are certain sectors of our human services work, Kasia, like particularly adult corrections and juvenile corrections, um,
Mm,
uh, those systems. In those systems, we have to train workforce to do a few things. The
mm-hmm.
tradition of the corrections workforce in the United States is to constantly project control and safety, because
Yes.
we have to manage environments of hundreds of people who have demonstrated a willingness to transgress law and in many cases do violence.
Mm-hmm.
And in that projection of control, there's a surface level incompatibility
Mm-hmm.
with the idea of leaning into the discomfort of managing one's fear through
Yes.
self exploration, because there is a notion of weakness attached to the vulnerability required to look inward. And I don't have
Exactly.
the luxury of being vulnerable. I have to demonstrate to 100 people that I run this unit, not them.
Yes.
And this is where we're starting to move the needle, because the motivation in doing this is not to engender some kind of weakness, but rather it's to truly engender the self control required to
Exactly.
lead people and model to people that whatever brought you here does not have to be the thing that
That
you.
will get you out.
Right, right.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And you know, I was thinking about the role of the psychotherapist, psychoanalyst. It's not just, you know, a therapeutic journey, but it's also a safe container where someone can hold the emotions that you are not ready, or the emotional states, or you know, any other thing that you're suffering through, that you're not able to hold yourself. And this is something that I must say was a very humbling in my intellectual presence, you know, and modus operandi in my life. That was something very humbling, that I can let go sometimes, exactly of control and exactly of safety, you know.
Yep. Yes.
uh, this
I couldn't agree more. And you know, when I think about someone's inability to manage or hold space for someone else's discontrol or dysregulation, that is the core impulse we try to address in our training. You have to, we use the lighthouse as the analogous symbol of what one's emotional state is ideally like during someone else's discontrol, because in the maritime world, the lighthouse did not cut itself from his moorings and go
Mhm.
out into weather and tide and conditions to help a boat navigate to safe harbor. The lighthouse stays where it is,
Exactly.
and vessels in distress navigate to it, because
Exactly.
it unidimensionally projects light one way. And I have witnessed more unnecessary use of containment procedures,
Hmm.
seclusion, manual restraint, wrestling with someone to anchor them to a bed in leather restraints. I have witnessed more of that come from responders escalating upon the presentation of someone else's emergency, which, and there's no shortage of psychological material that
Hmm.
can be evaluated to describe that phenomenon. We could talk about polyvagal theory and the
Yes.
difference between limited and wide diversity of thought
Yes.
and expression. We could talk about the simple anatomy of the sensory thalamus, the amygdala, the
Yes.
hippocampus, the neocortex. There are a number of ways to describe this phenomena of getting control of
Hmm.
the startle or flinch emotional response or even the psychomotor response
Yes.
that we cannot, that's going to happen. Like
Yes.
there's no avoiding it. What are you going to do with it after you experience it? And as educators, I think today our job is even less on the use of active listening skills and validation, and as much time is taken on introducing people to the journey of how they work, so that
Exactly.
and so they can avoid the downstream implications of not knowing that. You know,
You know, yes.
I was going to ask you, could you talk a little bit about how Jung distinguishes himself in his work from anybody else on this topic? Because if anything's true, that is.
Yes, that's a very good question. Jung, what I find particularly appealing about Jung is obviously the in-depth psychology. For me, Jung he was a man of extreme spectrum of vision and ideas and creativity. What I find particularly interesting is the dream analysis, and also of the unconscious content that manifests itself through dreams. And most specifically, one of the methods that I use very often at the executive practice is the association experiment. This is something that I have adopted from Jung's
Yes. Please
teachings.
talk more about that. I loved when I first met you that you were doing that, because I'm not aware of anybody doing that in the negotiation education space. And it's so freaking profound. Please.
It's extremely, extremely profound. So the association experiment is an experiment. You can use a list of 50 or 100 words. Those are the words that are provided by the teachings of Carl Gustav Jung. Usually with first-time clients, I start with the first 50-word version. And basically the way that it works is that you read random words. House, sin, home, pray, blue, water, and so on. And several things are done by the therapist or the analyst at the same time. First of all, you write down the response word of the patient or the client. And then you write down the time. So you basically use a stopwatch and you stop the time after the word has been uttered by the patient. And then you also write down any what we call complex indicators. So I don't know, as I just did now, paraverbal communication, or moving your body, or size, or I don't know, hesitation, or repeating the word, or smiling, or laughing, anything that you notice. And there are usually several types of complex indicators. And then you run the experiment again. Not to test the memory of the patient, but to see if the reproduction of the stimulus word, will it be the same? Will it be different? This time you don't time it the second time round, and you don't note down the complex indicators. You just write down the reproduction word. So the second round, and so on. Based on that, it's a little bit of then calculations. You get a very nice graph that shows you the prolonged response times for a given stimulus word, along with the number of complex indicators. For everyone, there is a different median. The median is approximately in the 18th millisecond. Some people have 25th. I had clients who had around 30 as the median. So you use this as a baseline for what we call identifying the complex words. Usually we identify out of 50, approximately 12 to 15 trigger words, and we work based on that. So we do a clinical analysis, which is called an anamnesis. It's a psychiatric overview or a psychological overview, depends. Some people, when they hear it's a psychiatric overview, they are a little bit overwhelmed.
Oh, so they head for the hills. Yeah.
Like a lot of my ex-boyfriends, who heard that I'm studying psychology. Oh my God, she's going to profile me.
Yeah.
There he goes,
Okay, yeah, Kasia, it's been nice, but take care.
It's been nice knowing you, So yes, there we go. When you hear the psychiatric overview, so I call it the psychological profile. The anamnesis, it's pretty neutral. And you look at the client's life events. So you go from the birth, what you remember. Was it a natural birth? Was it a C-section? Details like this. Tell me about the siblings. Tell me about the family environment. Tell me about the early childhood, then early adulthood, and so on. And based on this, the results. So you have got the stimulus words, you've got the prolonged response times, you've got the complex indicators based on the median that you've calculated. Along with this clinical psychiatric overview, you work with the client on the words, the connotations, the memories, the sensations, the feelings, and you unlock. I couldn't believe the first time I conducted the association experiment, the depth of content that is hidden and dormant in the unconscious that actually impacts us and triggers us in situations seemingly, normal, sometimes business circumstances. I don't know why I reacted in this particular way. Turns out maybe this person has a father or a mother complex.
Oh,
you know,
yes.
because they identify these things very, very strongly. So for me, it's one of the most profound tools and instruments that I use in my business practice to uncover, especially, when we feel great, we're doing great in the coaching sessions, but you feel like you're digging, but you're not there yet. You're hitting a
Yes.
stone basically. And usually that feeling indicates that there's some hidden unconscious content that is blocking the full potential.
Kasia, I'm just going to share with you, like, I'm thinking about being in a room full of police officers or corrections officers, or let's say direct level 8-10 hour shift, like behavioral technician level staff. And you're describing a process that sounds like it's long, complex, elaborate, scary. First, I would ask you a two-part question. Number one, can you share what you have observed in the transformation of people who have undergone this process with you? And number two, how long does it really take to begin to experience benefit?
Okay, so let me tell you, maybe if it's a very lengthy process, usually it's a process that takes between 5 to 7 hours, which is not that much of an investment. It depends on the capacity of the client.
Okay, that's a huge insight, because
Yes.
based on what you're talking about, we work with the patient on the words. It sounds like, okay, well, if I'm going once a week, this could be this could be a year. So you're
No,
talking about an intensive you're going to sit down with Dr. Kasia,
exactly.
and in 7 hours, you're going to get a map.
Yes, in 7 hours, you're going to get a complex map that shows you where the dormant unconscious elements complexes lie in the psyche. And then the transformation. I see transformations almost immediately by self-realization, by the raising of personal awareness, how people, but it's very important that you do this synthetic, I would say, retrospect biography, because then you can understand. If you do it in without the anamnesis that I was talking about, you're going to miss some elements. For example, I recently had a case where a patient was sharing with me that at some age, as a little child, she was removed out of her comfort zone in order to increase the level of a class. So she was taken out of her social circle because she was a very good student. She was put in another group of students to increase the level of those students. And okay, that's a story, for a lot of people, great story, maybe a little bit boring, Kasia, move on. But how I understand it is that at that point, she got the message, or her unconscious got the message: you cannot have both. You cannot be a great professional and you cannot have a great social circle. The divorce, the result of it, the divorce between relational and task oriented. Quoting her, one can never have it all. You cannot be beautiful, you cannot be successful, you cannot be happily married and be a professional woman, you cannot be a great mother and still have a great career. The message that she received, or how her mind interpreted this. And when we identify these types of elements in her biography, in her experiences, combined with the complex indicators, the body doesn't lie. If you're timed and you take a certain amount of time and you have complex indicators, you start moving your feet, your hands, whatever, you hesitate with the words, and also the first word that comes to your mind and mouth. These are very powerful forces that carry a
Oh,
lot of meaning in
oh
it.
my gosh. I absolutely love what I'm hearing about this. And I wish I I mean, I'm super grateful it happened the way it did. My journey into that approach to self-analysis just came through getting my ass kicked by
Mhm.
life in so many ways that I
I
sought
understand.
out. I kept putting myself in a corner here or there. And like you said earlier in the beginning, a calling. For whatever reason, I was very interested in throwing myself into whatever I feared for the simple desire to overcome it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I had some psychomotor experiences of that too. Um, you know, uh, when I was a firefighter, I live in a community that it's an island community. We're surrounded by water, and I'm the training captain of the fire department. And I'm not willing to let anybody know that I really don't like. I'm afraid to swim. I'm a smoker. I don't have a big breath hold. And I saw the opportunity to go to a rescue swimmer school.
Mm-hmm.
So I went as a smoker, terrified, simply because I did not want to be embarrassed by this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it was terribly uncomfortable. But it was through, let's say, exposure to people who modeled that they had overcome similar
Mm-hmm.
with knowledge of how to do it to overcome fear. That at the
Mm-hmm.
end of that school, you could put a weight vest on me and try to drown
Mm-hmm.
me, and I know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to do to avoid it. And I'm not afraid of the water anymore, and I could hold my breath up to 2 minutes and swim down to a car that
Mm-hmm.
had a mannequin in it and get it out. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, when it comes to crisis negotiation, the big fear is about assault and
Mm-hmm.
getting hit. So I threw myself into the tools to engender some degree of confidence that if I get smacked, I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to know what to do next. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say that what you're offering is for someone in these complex negotiations, whether they be crisis or at the board table, on
Mm-hmm.
how to manage the
Yes.
first thought that comes up. They
Mm-hmm.
understand as a result where it comes from, what's motivating it. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have any power in this moment anymore, and they can make a decision to not indulge the impulse and do something that's more constructive. That's what I see you offering.
Exactly. And make the decision. This is a very powerful phrase because it's not about, yet again, let's go back to what we were talking about, the shadow. It's not about suppressing, because anything that you will want to suppress will
Right.
rear its, excuse me, its ugly head strongest in the moment that you don't want it to. So it's not
I
about,
did it with bourbon for years. I got it. Yeah.
yeah, I got it too. I got it too. So, it's about making the decision. I accept you. I acknowledge you. Thank you for whatever message you're trying to provide my way. Thank you for this message. I choose to ignore it. That's my
Yeah,
choice. And that is ultimate empowerment.
it is.
When you have these tools that you can say, okay, this is what triggers me, and I have my demons and I have many of them, but I'm learning to be kinder. I had this critical view of therapy, kinder to myself, because I was always a very kind person to others, more so than to myself for many years. And that's not necessarily good. And I had this critical thought in my psychoanalytical journey, and that I shared with my supervisor and my analyst. And I said, don't you think that analysis is a little bit teaching people how to be egotistical? And she said, no, I think it's about teaching yourself to be kind and to accept yourself just as you are kind to other people. Do that to yourself,
Kasha,
and
I
that was,
love that. I
yeah,
love
me
that.
too. I loved it, and it's so, it opened something in me,
My therapist told me, Kasha, gave me a practical way of doing it. Because like you said, everyone is their own worst critic. Nobody can give me a shellacking better than me.
oh,
Like medieval Catholic level self-flogging. I can get into it. My therapist said, Andy, what if you were to visit little Andy, boy Andy, in your mind, knowing the way you are with other people, and now you see you as the boy? How are you going to react to that boy when they present all of this suffering? What are you going to do? Are you actually going to be critical of little Andy, or are you going to come alongside and embrace him and say, it's going to be okay? I
Yes,
got you. You know what I mean? Like,
I know exactly what you mean.
yeah. And the moment he did that, I would say, and I still have a proclivity for self-harm through criticism, self-criticism, that does make it easier. The idea of seeing, look, Andy, you made a mistake. This is the mistake you made. But here's how I forgive you. You don't need to keep to stay involved in this depression or these machinations about it. Let me help you move on to the next thing.
And I believe this is what you were asking me before. What do these people who work in highly tense crisis situation? I think this is exactly what is needed, less, because external manifestations of extreme power just prove how unpowerful you feel inside.
Oh
People
my gosh.
are,
Yes.
yes, look at, we mentioned Gary earlier, Gary Nessner. You, Gary, and Jack Cambria are my ultimate gurus. I think I mention you in every class that I have, so that people are really fed up with this already. But look at the standards of behavior. Gary is never an arrogant man, never an overpowering man. Jack has the nickname of Gentleman Jack in the circles for a reason.
We fight over the bill in every restaurant because he wants to grab it. It's
I
like
have
every
no
time.
doubts. Interacting with him was one of the most, pleasurable, because I was interviewing him, among others, for one of my 3 books. It was the most pleasurable experience, the kindest treatment. And this is real power, when you are secure in your vulnerability and not trying to hide, I don't have any vulnerabilities.
Oh,
We
I
all
love
have.
that you said that. I'm secure in my vulnerability. I had a former business coach refer to it as the shitty diaper. I'm okay holding up my shitty diaper. I
Yes.
thought it was a brilliant analysis.
Yes, it's very, I would say, it's very strong visually. So, but
Yeah, I don't mean to shock anybody, but you gave me the doorway earlier. I'm just going to say you told
I
me.
don't think, we've seen and heard so much. There's not a lot of things that can shock me, and then I think our viewers as well. So.
Listen, let me toggle over to the meeting, the Zoom meeting, and see if there are some questions there that folks want answered. Okay, we have some things in the chat. Okay, it was just about sound, no questions. All right. I'm going to invite, if there's anyone who'd like to unmute and ask or throw up in the comments a question they'd like to ask, or an area where they'd like Dr. Kasia and I to go down a rabbit hole and address, please do so. Okay. We have a lot of people in the Zoom, and I want to make sure that if there's anything that's intriguing you or you'd like us to talk more about, please indeed let us know what that is. How do, while we're waiting for that, Kasia, how do people learn more about your practice and what it is that you do?
Well, they can certainly visit my website, simply executivepractice.com, where you have all the services, the methodology. I also issue a weekly blog on themes that are usually at the intersection of business, new concepts, strategies, and psychology. They can also reach out. I will be happy to connect via LinkedIn, or they can also buy any of my 3 books, either Negotiation Booster or Negotiate Your Way to Success, or the Financial Times Guide to High Impact Negotiation.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So you have 3 books that you've published.
Yes, I have 3 books, 2 that were published by Business Expert Press in New York, and 1 book that was published by Pearson in London in the UK.
Okay, understood.
Yes.
You
Yes?
gave me a brilliant idea. I'm going to call my idea brilliant. I think you, Jack, Gary, and me need to come together on an outward-facing production like this. And
Would be my pleasure.
yeah, and we can talk about the psychiatric context, the hostage negotiation context, and then, I would love to see more negotiation educators working with you on curriculum development and methods of raising consciousness
Awareness.
on
Yes.
these principles. And I would love to see, I think the closest in the public safety domain that we ever got to living a life of self-exploration is with the great Tony Blauer, whose emphasis is on managing fear, because so much of what he does regards the presentation of violence and managing the startle flinch impulse and then converting that into a series of not only protective skills, but situational awareness skills, de-escalation skills, etc. And that, I think, would ideally be another conversation, Kasia, is that for you to connect the dots of psychology and maybe even the Jungian approach to fear management. We do have a question.
I see it by your body language. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Yes. Let's go over and grab it. Okay, so we have 2 questions actually. How do you manage when you've lost your temper? That's question number 1. Let's start there. How do you manage? Let's say you've identified that you've lost it. You're in the moment. What do? I have my things, but let's hear yours first, Kasia.
Well, first of all, it takes a little bit of, motivating for me to lose my temper on behalf of the other person. If it does happen, when it happens, let's say, first and foremost, I admit I did it. I recognize it. I say, excuse me, or I got carried away. I acknowledge it, that it happened. I try to apologize to the other person after some time. What happens, if I have this, I lose my temper, it's a very quick, it's like thunder, it's like a thunderstorm. 10 minutes, very intense. and then the emotions rapidly drop. I acknowledge it. Now, what I try to do also is I try to understand why, because if it comes to that, losing my temper, that's extreme.
Yeah.
What triggered it? So, what hurt so much inside that, of course, you can be tired, you can be exhausted, there can be many circumstances, but still, I strongly believe that it touched a nerve. And now, with my Jungian training and education, I really try to not go on a guilt trip. I'm a bad person, I lost my temper, I feel shame, and so on. I try to understand specifically why it happened in order to be able to navigate around that trigger in the next similar situation. So, in other words, not to develop a perceptual set where in the future, in a similar situation, I will be reacting based on past triggers. So
Right.
that's
You want to reduce the likelihood of that. That's the whole
exactly.
point.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add, Kasia, is that there are certainly times where in the professional response context, if we witness or we experience loss of self-control, loss of temper, we'll either be tapped out, like,
Mhm.
hey, you're out, or someone withdraws and says,
Mhm.
excuse me, I would appear to have lost my ability to manage
Mhm.
myself here. Jimmy, can you take over? I need to go
Mhm.
take 10 minutes,
Mhm.
depending upon the situation.
Yes.
So, and Gary would say the same thing.
Yes.
I'll tell you a quick funny story. In the medical model of hospitals, doctors never enjoyed being tapped out by staff that reported to them.
Mhm.
And that was a problem we had to manage at
Mhm.
the state psychiatric care level,
Mhm.
where it would be a recommendation. And the code we had for that was, hey, doc, you have a phone call, which means, hey, doc, you're making matters worse here. Let us take over.
Mhm.
And the doctor reserved the right to say, nope, tell him I'll call him back,
Mhm.
which was amazing, because the doctor is now claiming the right to continue to make things worse instead of accepting the message here
Yes.
from their teammates, like, hey, go take this phone call.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have another question. Two of them, actually. Great questions. How do you manage to be kind to yourself when intrusive thoughts come up? You mentioned you are now being kind to yourself. How do you keep this up? Great question, Victoria.
Yes. It's a great question, and I think I know from who it is. Thank you, Victoria, for that question. Uh, Not easy. I'm not gonna lie, not easy. Um, constant reminding, and trying to create a habit, I would say. When the self-criticism and the intrusive thoughts uh, arrive, I make sure, as I said before, to acknowledge them first and foremost, because anything that's back to the shadow, if you don't acknowledge it, it's going to be knocking on your door stronger and
Yeah.
stronger and stronger and stronger. I try to acknowledge it. I try to think, okay, here it comes. Again, I'm either self-blaming myself or guilt tripping myself or whatever, feeling like an imposter or feeling like I'm not good enough. Anything that to do that self harms you ultimately. I try to recognize it. Oh, here it is. And what Andy also said, if I were to look back at myself as a little child, when a lot of these things happen to us, although it sounds like a cliche, it's not, because a lot of these things and patterns of behavior, we develop them very early on in our childhood, and we carry that baggage with us throughout our lives. Would you also, if this was not you, would you behave like this to the other person? Obviously, the question is going to be no. And that stops some of the processes. At least that works for me.
Wonderful. Another question we have, Kasia, is from Emil. How do you
Why only I get questions?
no, how do you manage it when you're lost? We have that. Okay, from I won't name them. I'll keep them anonymous for you then. What advice do you have for people who lack confidence walking into a negotiation?
My main advice is that even people who lack confidence have had great moments of confidence in their lives, be it professional or personal, it doesn't matter, you know. And if you can recall that adversity that you overcame in your life at some point, I don't know, you got your dream woman to agree to marry you, or you landed your dream job, or you managed to do something that you overcome, like Andy, you told me about this, you know, swimming and holding
Right.
your breath and so on. So anything that you manage, we all have these little moments of glory in our lives. What I personally do is I try to remember them very vividly. It's very important. Jung also talks about this, that imagination and the recreation has to be based on very vivid imagination, not just imagining very superficially on the surface, but vividly recalling all the details of that moment of confidence, allowing that feeling to take over you, and then transporting that feeling into the situation, the current situation. This
I
is
couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I would also say, to some degree, that courage does not mean that we're not feeling the impulses of fear.
exactly. I couldn't have
You're
said it better myself.
you're leaning. The Tony Blauer refers to it as leaning into duress. I would describe it as leaning into discomfort. I've spent a good amount of time, Kasia, at altitude on ropes. So, as a rope rescue technician, we're always doing drills where there's a person that's on a bluff or a cliff. We have to descend on ropes,
Mhm.
create rigging around them, and then raise them back up. So, you're constantly managing the
Mhm.
impulses that your nervous system is experiencing from being in exposure, or recognizing that your life is on an 11 millimeter line, or your knowledge of how to use your descent equipment or
Mhm.
your brake rack or your knot tying craft. Because if you tie the wrong knot and it's not proper, that could be fatal. So,
Definitely.
while we're still doing these things, our nervous system is still encoding
Mhm.
all of this data, which means that we're feeling impulses, but we're doing it anyway, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, great question. Another question: how do you navigate someone's ego during a negotiation to reach a constructive outcome without escalating tension? I'll address that after you.
You want me to go first?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, I would say, and this is going maybe going to sound risk sounding a bit harsh, their ego is not your problem. The problem is how that ego will affect your ego. Okay? This is the issue. You're not responsible and you cannot be responsible for how another person will behave. But you are responsible of how that behavior will be mirrored in the skeletons in your closet and the demons that you carry. And of course, always respect your dignity to the other person,
Yeah.
acknowledging the situation and moving on if it's not possible.
So I'll add some context. I'm going to say the same thing from the lived experience perspective. Um, People who live with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder can sometimes show up as the second coming of Christ. And you're negotiating with someone who thoroughly believes that they're the creator. Our approach is to not even deal with their ego, but rather validate that they're seen, heard, and understood. Try to
Exactly.
find some kind of shared value in the moment: safety, respect, a court order. Suggest a course of action and describe how the suggestion is served in that prompt. And if we're met with resistance, to start with that again. So, if someone is presenting an extraordinary ego or a complex ego, we're just letting them know that they're seen, heard, and understood. Here's something that we need to square with: the law, a policy, um, saving someone's life, something that's shared. We
Hmm.
suggest and describe a desirable outcome. And we generally grind people down to collaboration without they feel like they have volition, agency, and choice in the
Hmm.
negotiation with their giant ego.
Brilliant.
Yeah, that's the way that we do that. Okay, final question, because Kasia has a hard stop. I'm going to consolidate. You actually have a lot more questions, but I'll consolidate them.
How lucky am I?
Yeah. What are some small daily habits or exercises that can help improve negotiation? And how do you manage the impression to be discriminated and the feeling to be humiliated during a negotiation? Walk away. So, what are habits to improve negotiation? How do you manage the experience of feeling discriminated against during the negotiation? Go.
Little habits. Learning how to say no to small things without feeling guilt. That's a variation of being kind to yourself. Respectfully declining. Second, collecting small successes. I managed to negotiate a better price at a small grocery shop or whatever. Small things that shows and that proves to yourself you can do it. And that eventually will give you the self-impression that I'm a successful negotiator. Those are two things that I personally needed to learn. To walk away, to say no, with full responsibility for my feelings and not responsibility for the feelings of the other person. Having been in some relations with very toxic people, narcissistic people, people with personality disorders, that for many years I believed it was my problem.
Yes.
Until I had to learn not necessarily, and that was a long path to recovery as well. So that's my very personal answer and advice to this type of question. Being discriminated against, I'm a rebel, so I felt I always had to fight my way up ever since I was a child. And
I bet.
my parents put me into school in the US when I was 6 years old, and I knew two words: cat and dog. And as you can imagine, that was not enough to hold a conversation.
Sure.
So ever since then, I always felt like an immigrant. I always felt like I was somewhere I didn't belong. I think this is the first time in my life where I actually feel at home. So a lifetime of a battle. That for me, the driving force when I felt discriminated against, and I've been very often objectively, is keep on going. You know, I very much like this saying: if you're going through hell, and discrimination can certainly feel like hell, keep on walking. Don't enjoy the views, you know?
Yeah. Remember Viktor Frankl. I mean,
Exactly.
was there a greater hell? And I would also add to that end, Kasia, as someone who has had more personal insults thrown at them, websites dedicated to defaming them, bodily fluid thrown at me. I do not need someone else's gesture of respect to feel self-respect, particularly if I have a goal in mind. If my responsibility is to provide de-escalation to someone who's presenting stress and discontrol, my anticipation is that I'm going to have to move through a bunch of profanity and personal assertions about me that I don't agree with. And even if I don't agree with them, it doesn't move my needle because my self-appraisal is already solid. So I will own and take responsibility for what I have to, and I will not take responsibility for things that I don't have to. And that has been very empowering. I'm learning even a little bit about that. I'm in a little campaign in my community to be the fire commissioner here. I had been in our fire department for a long time, and it's a position that provides oversight to the fire department's leadership, and it's a board. And when I put my signs up recently, a few of them got thrown into the woods, and I witnessed that with. I mean, first I was a little irritated because these signs are like $15 a piece. They're, and I had to pay for them. But I was not personally waylaid by the appraisal that someone has of me that resulted in them throwing the sign in the woods. I still know I'm a good candidate. And that's a product of the work that I've had to do over the years. So anyway, listen, we're over time, and I am super grateful for you being in the world, for your sense of duty and willingness to be of service to other human beings to help raise their consciousness and awareness to make the world a better place. I feel so excited about our collegial relationship and doing more together, meeting with Jack, meeting with Gary, sharing meaningful work. And I'm super excited about what you're doing with your practice and what you're contemplating, with Italy, and some ideas on bringing your good work to the lives of people who desperately need it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andy. It was a pleasure, as always, interacting with you, and such a brilliant conversation. I really admire, and I'm so much looking forward to, I think, more work to come, and more creative solutions and activities together. And thank you to our lovely audience as well.
Yes.
A lot of them are here in Europe. It's getting late. It's almost 10 p.m. So I really admire, the energy put into the questions and the engagement and the obviously active listening. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for the support. It's been a great pleasure, and we shall meet again.
We shall. Next week, in fact, you're meeting with our instructor cadre.
Exactly, I am. Yes.
Okay.
It's noted in my calendar. Yeah.
Good. Take good care and be well. We'll be in touch soon, Kasia.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
More that you can lean into your own personal discomfort, say what needs to be said in a non-offensive way, the more you make the world a better place.